2 p.m. now, and to keep up with time, let's commence special session 2 on the theme Building Resilient Foundations for the Future. And I would take this pleasure of inviting the distinguished speakers to take their place on the dais. Mr. Ashwin Parekh, Managing Partner, Parekh Advisory Services Limited. Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, Professor MIDS. Mr. Gopinath Kotishwaran, and may I request Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, author and former Executive Director, Tata Sons, to take their place on the dais, please.
Okay. Just அதே அப்படியே தானே இருக்கும் உங்களுக்கு பாஸ் லெவல் தான் பண்ணுங்க சைஸ் பார்க்கணும் பண்ணுங்க.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the distinguished speakers with a big round of applause. Whoever has had their lunch and back to the room here, thank you so much for being here early. And I think just a matter of few minutes, rest of us will join us here. And anyway, there are so many of them watching us live, so we have to keep up with time. So may I have the AV of the panelists, please?
Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan is a veteran business leader with over 5 decades of management experience across Unilever and the Tata Group, and a former executive director of Tata Sons. An accomplished author and sought-after speaker, Mr. Gopalakrishnan currently serves on multiple boards and is distinguished professor at IIT Kharagpur. Mr. Ashwin Parekh is a seasoned chartered accountant with over 47 years of experience across financial services, governance, and institutional transformation, and is the managing partner of Ashwin Parekh Advisory Services LLP. A former senior partner at EY and executive at Deloitte, Mr. Ashwin served as an independent director on leading boards and have advised regulators and policymakers across banking, insurance, and capital markets. Dr. M. Vijay is a noted development economist whose work focuses on labor markets, technological change, and political economy of development. A professor at MIDS and policy advisor to the government of Tamil Nadu, Dr. Vijay is also the co-author of the Dravidian model published by Cambridge University Press. Mr. Gopinath Kotishwaran is a seasoned global business leader and co-founder of Disruptive AI, with prior leadership roles at Latent View Analytics, Philips, and Johnson & Johnson. An alumnus of IIT Madras, IIM Calcutta, and IMD Switzerland, Mr. Gopi brings deep expertise across strategy, analytics, and AI-led transformation.
To speak on this, discuss on the topic, building resilient foundations for the future, may I now invite the moderator, Mr. Gopinath Kotishwaran, to take the session forward, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to stall a little bit to get more people into the room. Can I have my presentation, please? Today's topic is building resilient foundations for the future, right? And I genuinely feel honored and privileged to have a panel of this nature, and I should thank Captain for organizing this, because I have read R. Gopalakrishnan's books. I have a signed copy of one of his books inside the boardroom. He sits on multiple boards. Unbelievable person. It's just an honor to have you on stage today. Mr. Ashwin Parekh, he's on the board of one of our clients. And what I really like, he's on the board of multiple companies, ICICI Securities, multiple Birla companies, Nippon Life, quite a few companies that he's on the board of. But what I really love about him is he called us at Disruptive AI and said, can you do a 2-hour session for me to learn about agentic AI? And the three of us flew, the partners flew from Chennai to Bombay to do this session for him. And that 2-hour session went on for 3 hours. And the number of, I can assure you that some of the operating CEOs might not have the kind of knowledge he has on agentic AI at this point in time, right? So, phenomenal panel. Vijay Bhaskar, he's a professor at MIDS, Development Sciences, and he's on the State Planning Commission. And in the past few days, when I met him for this panel and I've interacted with him, I've learned so much about the changes that we need to make at a social level, at the what being competitive nationalism is, and how to go about doing this. So my job today is to make sure that they get enough time to share their knowledge with you. I'm going to take a few minutes to set this up. And then I'm going to invite Ashwin, Vijay Bhaskar, and then R. Gopalakrishnan to say a few words with PPT or without PPT. It's really up to you. 10 minutes each. And then I have a few questions that I've written down. I'll keep it as short as possible. But whatever questions you have, please make sure you raise it. And we would love to address all these. So having a panel of this nature is just unbelievable. So make use of it, give your questions, and make use of it. So I'm going to slightly challenge you a little bit. To start with, I just want to start with the Nelson Mandela quote, which is, do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again. This is Nelson Mandela. Resilience, which is how do you get back again? The definition of resilience is you get hit. That is real life, that is real world. This morning speaker, he spoke about how he did his duties, how many funerals he went to, how challenging. It was like very challenging to hear that. But the resilience is the most important thing on this. And I'm going to touch upon 3 things. How resilient are companies? First, countries. How resilient are countries? How resilient are top companies? And how resilient are human beings? Right? These are the 3 things. And I'm just going to show you some graphs and figures. And I might ask you some questions. So be prepared to answer that. The first one is I just looked at what are the top 10 countries in 1920s by GDP. Right? This is just GDP. And what are the top 10 countries in 2026 projection? India is number 4, which is just a projection. We will be at $4.5 trillion soon. But when I look at this, it's the same 10 countries. The order has changed. It's the same 10 countries, top 10 countries, right? So these countries are reasonably resilient, right? Obviously, the top 3 are changing. Hopefully, India gets into the top 3. And when you are a leader in this top 10, then you have to behave differently. But the resilience at top 10 countries level is fairly high. In 100 years' time, there's no new entrant into the top 10 countries and nobody's left the top 10 countries. Think about it, right? Next one, this is closer to us. Look at the top 10 companies in the 1990s and look at the top 10 companies today. Any observations? If you have anything, shout it out. I know you guys have just had lunch. Any observations? Sorry? Go ahead. Products to services. Not true, unfortunately, but none of them are the same. Think of it that way. The top 10 companies, when I started my career in mid-90s, the people that I looked up to, I mean, the other day I showed a picture of Jack Welch. None of the younger people recognized him. At that time, we used to treat him like God. 20 years to become CEO, 20 years as CEO. Nothing in common. Lot of technology companies, right? There are a lot of it. Of course, given the India theme, not one Indian company. I would like to see in the next 30, 40 years more Indian companies come there. But here's the question to you. In 1990, what do you think was the average age of the companies on this side of the chart, on the left-hand side of the chart? Any guess? 80? Okay, good one. Your name, please. Ramesh, any other guesses? No? Okay. 135 years. On an average, these companies existed for 135 years in 1990, right? I did the math myself, so should be reasonably accurate. So this top 10 companies today, what's their average age? 50? 20? That's like really cutting it because even Meta was launched only in 2004. It's 2026. Meta itself is 22 years now. The average is 43 years today. And if I look at six of these companies are less than 40, in their 20s or 30s. Think of it, right? The top 10 companies today are fairly young. What happened to the companies in the past? Resilience, what happened to these companies? And will these companies exist after 50 years? Good question. And that's what I want to ask the panelists. And here's human life expectancies from 1900s to today. And this was triggered by our panelist, Gopalakrishnan, phenomenal thinker. He's going to talk about some of this soon. If I look at the life expectancy in the 1900s, it was 32 years, 30, 35 years. That was the life expectancy. Today, it's 72 years. The conditions have changed. Lots of things have changed. And that's a big change. So three things we looked at. Country-wise, fairly good resilience. Company-wise, very poor resilience. And human being-wise, pretty good resilience. If you're going to live for 72 years, that's pretty good. And we might make it to 100 as an average in a 50-year time frame with all the genomics things that we're doing. So what are we going to do today? I have three panelists. So here's what I'm going to drill on. Our life expectancy has increased. What can we learn from the human body that we can apply to business? And this is something that I would love to hear Gopalakrishnan's views on this. To sustain one of the leading economies in the world, it's not just good to be in the top 3 or top 4. To sustain it, what are the strategic investment choices we need to make? And that's something I'd love to hear from Ashwin Parekh. And with the world becoming more unpredictable, how do we cope with these uncertainties, right? So what is the role of social coherence? How do we work as communities? And what is the role of competitive nationalism? What is the role of education? Here are the things that I would want Professor Vijay Bhaskar to deal with. So just setting the scene, I just want you to know this is as good a panel that you can ever get. I am so excited about it. So we are going to start with Ashwin Parekh, hear his views, then Professor Vijay Bhaskar, and then with you. So 10 minutes each approximately. And then I have a few questions, but more importantly, any question that you have, write it down. I'd love to get their views on it. Thank you very much. Please. You can. Okay. 10 countries.
10 countries, top 10 countries. No, just to continue with Dr. Gopi's point that he made. The second slide. There's something interesting about those 10 countries, and I thought I'll just point that out and then quickly move on to my presentation. But, okay, till you put it out, you see, I'll tell you, if you study last 100 years of development across Europe, across US and Asia, you will find that different countries, different economies had what we now call demographic premium, the age factor. So let's start with Europe. In the 30s, Europe had a tremendous advantage of demographic premium. People were young, industrial revolution was happening. Germany, Spain, Italy, they took a lead, and they were very rich nations at one point in time. What did they do with their demography premium? What did they do with it is everybody's, it's a history, everybody knows about it. They went into World War I, went into World War II, used up their premium, sort of, and what they could have gained tremendously otherwise by way of innovation and so many other industrial revolution or development, they wasted it. Then you saw, say, Japan on that. Japan had the demographic advantage. People were young, World War was getting over, they learnt a bitter lesson out of the World War. And what they did do, they used that for very strategic investments. So, I mean, friends, US, one of the major sort of countries to develop semiconductors, chips as we call them, first went from US to Japan. In fact, people like Sony and the others gave a completely new twist to semiconductors. They started using it in vehicles. So you find a huge growth of auto industry in Japan. It found its way in entertainment, and you found those chips in in televisions and other entertainment. So they used the demographic advantage. Then came China, around 90s or 2000. China used its demographic premium, young people deployed with proper direction, in terms of education, in terms of giving them proper jobs, high value jobs, value addition, became a supermarket for manufacturing in the world. China used the demographic advantage to the best possible extent. Now it's India's story. Friend, it's India's story now. I mean, the average age is absolutely, I mean, we still got about 15 more years, 20 more years to our advantage. So I thought I'll pick up from Gopi's point to develop on saying that the demographic advantage, you need political stability, you need institutional sort of, investment kind of zeal, and you need a lot of support from people to really get to the benefit that, let's say, some of the countries have benefited. I'll just move on to my presentation if it can be. I won't take more than, I've got 8 minutes left, so I'll just finish it off. But when I put up my thoughts, friends, I have borrowed a lot of my thinking from Alvin Toffler. People who, many of you may have read his work, but those who may not, those who have not, he was one of the greatest thinkers. In 1970, Alvin Toffler talked about changes that were far-reaching. People in 1970 wouldn't have even visualized. And he talked about one thing very interesting. He said that it's not the change, but the speed with which the change will hit us. We'll find ourselves totally grappling with that. Some people may take it well, they may want to move with the curve, many will remain behind the curve. And that's what Alvin Toffler said. Can the presentation be put up, or otherwise I'll read out of my presentation? Okay. Yeah. So, first slide, please. Yeah. So, future shock. It said some 7 things. It said it's a psychological condition. Then it says acceleration of change, breakdown of traditional structures, need for anticipatory democracy. This is the most critical part, basically. The super-industrial revolution, information overload and overchoice. That's the one more thing. And then transient and instability is the other thing. So what the book talked about was a shock that would be chaotic. It would be upon people and nations to really make the most out of that chaotic kind of a condition. That's where he started with the opportunities in the shocks. Next slide, please. So 10 years later, after 1970, he came out with another book, which was called The Third Wave. And what did he do? He actually described economies who are in different waves of growth. The first wave, of course, I mean, human beings have lived in the first wave for almost 1900 years, and that's the agrarian, rural, traditional kind of economies. The second wave is the industrial, urban, and bureaucratic kind of a wave, so the second wave. The third is the wave of digital, knowledge-based, networked sort of societies or nations. That's what he thought about in 1980, 10 years after he wrote the first book. There's something interesting about India. Whenever I go for road shows outside of India, and people ask me to talk about India, I'll just say it's one of those places where centuries coexist. You know, you find that on the same road you have a Mercedes car plying and you have a bullock cart also, you know, and he has equal right to work on that road basically. So it's one of those places where you have different cultures, I mean ancient cultures, driving from so many years, and yet we imbibe everything. We just have we have inherent strength of just accepting everything. We don't throw away anything. We are not a throwaway culture people at all. We keep our parents with us. We, in as much as we use a dalda dabba, you know, and try and make the best out of it, don't discard it as well. We just don't like to throw away things. We just imbibe, we just absorb and take, basically. So we are in a wave collision. We are in three different waves living all at the same time, basically. We have one set of people like Gopi and the others who talk to us about advanced AI kind of a situation. And on the other hand, we have people who still are talking about fodders in the cattle market or whatever. Institutions are becoming more adaptive, or they need to become more adaptive. There is going to be an anticipatory democracy. People are still fighting out in organizations whether they should work for 72 hours a day in a week, or they should be. Anticipatory democracy will prevail, you know. I mean, in organizations and in institutions. The speed of change will be the main stressor. Information overload will become a major problem. People will have so many. Ask Google one question, it gives you several answers. You do not know what to do with those answers, basically. Resilience and not resistance. That's the mantra that, let's say, that's what India 2035. Next slide. So let's look at what we are going through. We are in the third wave. That is, the third wave has started riding. Demassification has started happening. We are a prosumer, which means we produce and we consume. This economy is distinctly different from so many other economies. We are a prosumer economy, basically. Decentralized and advocacy, information and central resource, national state under pressure but not dead. I'll touch upon this. If you study in the last 5 years, the amount of development that the government has done, the policymakers have done, it's just remarkable. I mean, the amount of, and it's all because of stability. One doesn't know which government, one is not talking about that. One is talking about stability in the thinking, in the policy making, and that is something which is there. So we are under pressure at this point in time because in so many areas we are far behind, and I'll touch upon that a little while later, but we are not dead. We are responding now, we're going to get back. Need for a new value system. There is certainly a need. I mean, we'll have to create a new value system. Some of the old institutions, old method of education perhaps will get challenged, you know. A 15-year-old boy today doesn't want to go about the same manner, the way in which his father or his grandfather studied in the class. So there is going to be a totally new, let's say evolving a new value system. And then the crisis of second wave institutions. I'll touch upon this because people who are participating in this seminar today, you will realize that institutions which are moving from second wave to the third wave will find it extremely difficult, you know, to really, because both these will coexist. You will still have people, senior people in the jobs. You will still have people, young people who will be very adaptive to AI. Age doesn't matter really. Quite honestly, age doesn't. At my age, I'm learning, in fact, you know, and so is any progressive person. But to take care of those who are not at speed and to also take them with you is going to be the challenge of the second and the third wave, sort of. That's the point I was trying to. Next slide. Semiconductors was a big sort of opportunity. It all started in 70s and 80s in the US. We missed it somehow. I just leave. I'm not talking too much about it. I mean, at the moment, I'm now mindful that I have 3 minutes left. But I'll just leave a small thought in your minds. The first development of, let's say, semiconductors or chips in China happened on account of 3 young engineers, Chinese engineers who worked. I mean, this is something that was covered very well in Chris Miller's book, called Chip Wars. He's talking about three engineers, Chinese engineers, who were working in US companies, took technology to China, the government supported their ideas, and China got into what's now realized as one of the best sort of, wave in the semiconductors area. Something similar happened in Japan. Indians, I mean, earlier in the earlier session, somebody did mention, we work, but we are not somehow or the other innovative. He talked about the Bay Area where discussions on innovations happen. We don't do that somehow. So many, so many young engineers who would have worked in semiconductor business in US and would have come back and talked to Indian government or Indian state or Indian investors to really put some money into or put some resource into this. It didn't happen. Now it has started happening. Now it has started happening in a big way because the government has realized that there's a need to do something about it. That's the third wave, big third wave that's certainly going to happen in the Indian case. What will it involve? Huge amount of capital requirement, risk appetite, state industry compactor. There is to be a good connect between the state and the industry. You've seen already that the announcements Tatas have made, for example, along with the Taiwanese companies and all, with the support of the government. Then the brain drain versus the brain gain. We must get our engineers back from the US. Geopolitical and security calculus is the most critical part in the new dimensions that we have to look at. Next slide. AI is going to be the game changer. What's India doing right? These are some of the institutional developments, DPDP Act, India AI Mission. These are all government-led, let's say, infrastructure for AI. And this infrastructure will pave, to my mind, a long way in creating a good AI kind of deep-rooted AI into our corporates. Where it still falls short, it's still fragmented. Weak algorithm accountability, compute and infrastructure still lag. Cybersecurity and AI-specific risks are still existing. The more the AI, the more the cybersecurity guys use more of AI than the institutions themselves. And the skill and economic systems. So what are the next slide? Yeah, take the next one. The last one is for today's session. I thought I'll leave some thoughts. One is anticipatory or institutions, not just responsive. Adaptive, not bureaucratic managements. Technology must be treated as strategic infrastructure. China plus one is an opportunity, but it's not a guarantee. We have to make it, I suppose. Human capital is our real strength, so we must invest in deep skilling. This is true for all the institutions over here. Invest in reskilling people, Governance must be transparent, accountable, and India must manage this wave collusion. Before I move out, on the reskilling, one of my experiences, and then I'll conclude my part. I was invited by the World Bank to assist one of the Sri Lankan banks to carry out a VRS program. And I was utterly surprised when the program was conducted. A large number of almost 28% of the people from the bank decided to take the voluntary sort of retirement. And they were in the age group of about 35 to about 55, to my utter surprise, as I said. 7-8 years later, they all went away from the system. They took early retirement. 7-8 years later, when I went back to Sri Lanka as a part of a follow-up review, I realized that almost 7% of those guys, 70%, 7 out of 10 people, had once again rejoined banks, reskilled themselves. They had learned how to work on computers. They went back and took up their jobs. So, age is not a factor. It can still be done. That's what I thought I'll just leave behind.
Yeah. Sorry? I'm there. Yeah, thanks. Can you operate it from here? I can do it here? Thanks, yeah. Fine? Okay.
Moving forward,
Fine. Great, yeah. Okay, no. So, No, I'm, okay. What's it? Okay. We start from the beginning, then I can. Okay, yeah. So, good afternoon, and thank you, MMA, for this invite. In particular, to Captain Vijay Kumar for continued support, and of course, to Mr. Gopi for making me think about what I have to speak much earlier than what I normally do. So, I think at least 4 days ago, he called and then he said, "Hey, what are you going to talk about?" I need some ideas so that I can talk to other panelists as well. So in fact, he made me think. So yeah, so thanks Gopi for that. So as you would have realized, I'm not a managerial person. I'm not in business. I'm an academic. So my thoughts are essentially twofold. First, I would like to talk about two dimensions that we need to be extremely wary of, which I think are very critical, are very, what they do is essentially they undermine resilience, yeah? So we need to be careful about that, and I will tell you why. And then two, I'll talk about two possible pathways through which we can address these kind of dangers, that are kind of emanating, okay? Now, the first one is what I see as a aggregation problem. That is what as individuals at the micro level think as very rational, sensible decisions. When they kind of aggregate at a global scale, it's a crucial driver of fragility, uncertainty, and undermines resilience big time. So just give three examples. One at the individual level, as we all know, we all do air conditioning, we all drive cars. We drive cars because we want to go faster, because we need to go faster. We use air conditioning simply because we want to be comfortable. But I was told that in Chennai, the biggest source of heat stress is going forward is because of air conditioning, because apparently it's only 5% of households actually have air conditioning, and the more we use, the 5% uses, the more it's going to impact others, and everybody is going to follow suit. Yeah, that is one. Second, talking about an individual firm, clearly cost cutting is an important means of driving value, creating shareholder value, but at the same time, we do know what that means in terms of the firm's ability to invest in long-term capability of its workforce, one, and second, the inability to create redundancy within the system, and three, the fact that when you actually try to undermine the cost of labor, you are actually undermining the source of demand, right? So who's going to buy the products if you're not going to put enough money into the hands of the workers who work for you? But clearly for an individual firm, that may not be its priority. So when you kind of aggregate it, it kind of leads to a crisis in the demand, yeah? And finally, when you think of nations, when they act in some sense with narrow interests, and we have seen enough and more examples of it, especially in the last few years, as to what it can do globally, yeah? It can be about delaying emission cuts because it's in your own national interest, but the fact that all these things together contribute to global instability is something that, we can't kind of disagree. So the big problem is this: how are we going to regulate or ensure that how we act at an individual level, at the level of the firm, or at the level of the nation actually aligns with ensuring resilience at the global level? Yeah, I think that's the key challenge, for which I think, one, we need to think in terms of coordination across multiple scales of governance. It can be at the state level, national, and global. And this coordination obviously has to take place, can take place only when there are shared norms with actors that across all scales actually kind of, subscribe to. The norms should be about what should be the collective good, what should be the collective goal, yeah? And what kind of institutions are we going to generate? In fact, Mr. Ashwin spoke about the need for institutional resilience. And how do we ensure that institutions actually make sure that what we do at the individual level and everyday basis, at the home, at the level of the factory, in the workplace, and so on, actually contributes to and not undermine the collective good? And finally, I think it again goes back to what Mr. Ashwin said, this idea of epistemic humility. I think to acknowledge that we do not know enough. In fact, I think Mr. Ashwin would be aware of this. When Alvin Toffler wrote those two books, none of his peers took him seriously. It was a popular bestseller, but none of the sociologists of the generation actually thought that what you're saying was, particularly profound. So the other dimension, which I think is very, very important going forward, which is again a national level problem, is the growing inequality within countries. Yeah, it's just not true of India, but globally you find that kind of happening. And why inequality can undermine resilience? One, it concentrates adaptive capacity. The people at the top have the capacity to kind of adapt, leaving a large number of people actually vulnerable to the fast changing. It can be climate change, it can be loss of biodiversity, and so on, climate risks. And it also means that it prevents us from coming together. Yeah, so you can't forge a collective response when there are. We can see it again all around. One can again, on an everyday basis, one can think of how we look at garbage, yeah, and how people talk about traffic rules. I mean, one can think of any number of things as to why, people at the bottom of the ladder think that they don't have to follow suit. When we think certain norms have to be followed, they think it doesn't need to be kind of adhered to, yeah. So the key thing here is, on the one hand, there's a strong incentive for elites to exit the system. So elites might private kind of, we might just move into gated communities. Some of us might want to move to Mars, but that's the kind of a solution that one is kind of thinking of, right? So the sense of shared security again gets us underbuilt. Now, I'll just move on to two things which I think we need to kind of factor in to ensure that these, both the global commons issue and the inequality issue can be resolved. One is, of course, the importance of fraternity and social coherence. Why do I say that? Because that's the only way we can build societies, bring societies together. And it's also very, very important to realize that the extent of interdependence, it's not between human beings and mind, but between human beings and nature and systems which kind of transcend globally, which transcends national borders, yeah? And the other important thing here is when you're talking particularly about fraternity, it introduces the element of moral obligation. They're not legally enforceable, but once you create fraternity in people's minds, then, it creates a moral obligation which drives the way we act, not just every day, but also how we kind of relate to one another. So cohesion and fraternity, they're slightly different things. We can probably talk about it, but one thing that I want to say is that cohesion can be in some sense enforced, by a government and so on, but fraternity is something, which is built from the bottom up. So between these two, it's possible to think of layered solidarities. I might feel that I'm a Tamilian, I might feel that I'm an Indian, but I also feel that I'm a global citizen. These layered solidarities are kind of very, very important to kind of build going forward. So the challenges, I have 2 more minutes. How much time do I have? Yeah, okay. So one is, we all, soon after the nuclear arms race, Bertrand Russell proposed this idea of a world government, yeah? And now to my mind, the need for a world government is much, much more than ever before. But what kind of a government can that be? That can also become authoritarian, whether it accommodates all voices of both the rich and the not so rich nations. These are questions that we need to kind of take into account. But the fact that regulation has to be transnational, governance has to be transnational is something which climate change and loss of biodiversity and the loss of global commons is telling us much, much more loudly than ever before. And one important, another dimension where we can possibly work, you and I here, is about education, yeah? Again, this is something going back to what Mr. Ashwin spoke about. Yes, education towards building capital is clearly important, but that alone is very, very insufficient. We need to therefore move away from the emphasis on human capital, but focus on how to build epistemic resilience, that is knowing how to learn, to social relations, resilience, how to kind of learn together. And 3, this idea of moral imagination, where we know that we are interdependent and are answerable to one another, irrespective of whether one is in one country or another part of the continent. And last, the most important point is, it's important to normalize failure as a way of learning. And again, you started with Nelson Mandela's quote. I'm ending with that. Thank you.
Hello? Hello? It's working? Okay. I don't have any profound charts, so I won't go there. And I find my task simplified because I loved everything that was said by the two previous speakers. I will focus on what I did not love. My friend Ashwin talked about Alvin Toffler and the rate and pace of change. I have a slightly different point of view, and if time permits, we can create heat like the Lok Sabha without gerrowing each other. Because it's not the rate of change that matters, for God's sake. Alvin Toffler is wrong. Alvin Toffler gave you the impression that change is accelerating. Of course, it's accelerating. But the tools to cope with that change are also accelerating. I remember as a young child sitting in my village, which is near Mannargudi here in Tamil Nadu. My grandfather would tell me stories. And he said it in Tamil, of course, but I will, for the benefit of those who don't speak Tamil, say it in English. He said when I was a child, so he is telling me in 1950s that when he was a child, a big black monster puffing smoke came to Mannargudi railway station. And it would take you to Madras within 8 hours. So far, we're going in a Matuvandi, which is a bullock cart, and it took 8 days. The pace of change is alarming. I don't know how you people will survive. My father told me the same thing. I've told my son the same thing. Now my son is telling my grandson the same thing. So don't kid yourself. Exponentially, there is change. Has been going on for the last 200, 300 years. But the tools to cope with the change are also rising exponentially. The gap is constant. So let's debate whether Alvin Toffler should create alarm and panic in people by telling them, oh, it's all changing, it's all changing. Of course it's changing. The thing I liked about Professor Vijay Bhaskar is that he talked to the micro affecting the macro. And I fully agree with him. The problem of resilience can be understood if you can cellularize organizations rather than aggregate them into matrices. I want to talk to both these points through a subject which have fascinated me, and I am no expert on. I am deeply conscious as distinguished cardiologist sitting here, Dr. Chokalingam. But I don't think I'm going to say anything incorrect. Otherwise, you can always put up your hand and say that's rubbish. Look at the human body. We are about to depart from common sense and enter artificial intelligence. Please be careful. There is no substitute for natural intelligence, at least so long as we are all alive. So here's my point about the human body. Which is the most resilient thing that you have seen in your life? It's the human species. Well, I'm not talking of animal species or plants. Let's keep to humans. It has survived. Not only has it survived, it has adapted, it has learned new things, and the human species has increased its mortality. You saw a chart from 30 years to 70 years. And now people are talking of living even longer. I won't be around to see it, but maybe in my next incarnation I will. What is the lesson you can learn from that? Biology teaches you more than we think. We tend to dismiss biology as a light subject. It is not. Because the human body is comprised of millions or billions of cells. Each cell is autonomous. There is no deputy general manager, super general manager, vice president. Each cell is autonomous by itself. And the cells self-coordinate. That's why you and I are sitting here. Every second, even as I'm talking to you, there are cells in your body that are dying. That cells in your body are coming alive. We are not aware of it. The pace of change is increasing. We are moving, this planet is moving at 25,000 miles per hour. Are you conscious of it? Do you think you're whizzing past at 25,000 miles? You sit in an aeroplane and say, oh, it's going at 1,000 miles per hour. change is relative. This is the first principle that nature teaches you. And I want to therefore draw a lesson from biology and say, well, what is it that's happened? Say during the period 1800 to now, that has caused the human body, human species to have a mortality which has tripled or doubled. First, disease reduction. Second, anticipation through learning. Basically, all the mumbo jumbo can be converted into these two simple lessons. Disease through hygiene. I'm very proud I worked in a soap company. People used to pull my legs saying you studied engineering, you're working and selling soap. Soap has saved more human lives than the entire pharma industry. I want you to listen to me carefully. And when COVID came, they said soap industry is very valuable. Do you know that child mortality has improved dramatically because not only soap, by the way, I'm including in that hygiene and stuff like that. The second is vaccination. The whole science of vaccination is under 100 years, 150 years old. This anticipation through learning continuously is a characteristic of the human being. Organizations. So can you make your company like a human being? Therefore, a little more intelligent, a little more. And if you come at it from a common sense point of view, you learn a lot of lessons about how to increase the mortality of companies. You'll forgive me for taking the slightly different point of view, but I don't think it's an opposite point of view. Because, I'm 81. I value longevity as an attribute. The second is I've worked in two companies which are over 150 years old. So you may say, this is a dinosaur who's born from a grandfather dinosaur. But that's my experience. But through my experience of the last 65 years, 55 years, I have observed startups within my own company, by the way. I've got my young friend here, Suresh Narayan. I call him young, but he's retired. Okay? These are all relative sort of words. And we have seen how you can start a new venture, how you can seed a new idea which wasn't there at all earlier, and how things die. So I want to close with two little stories, and then I think I'll finish my 5 minutes. Because stories make it, I remember my grandfather, frankly, no disrespect to him, for the stories he told me. And then he would tell me all this. I never thought of the steam engine as revolutionizing life until I heard my grandfather say that instead of 8 days, he can reach Madras in 8 hours. And it's the same down the line. All of us know this when you talk to your children and grandchildren. But here are the two stories. Japan was very nationalistic in the 1920s. And a young boy was born to a family. His name was given as Hiro Onoda. By the way, I'm telling you true stories. They sound like Kadagutram, but it is not that. You can verify them if you want through Google or artificial intelligence or whoever is the right guy. By the time he was 20 years old, Hiro Onoda was grasped with nationalism because Emperor Hirohito was ruling Japan. Japan was going to enter the war. They were going to bomb Pearl Harbor, or they had already bombed Pearl Harbor. He joined a very distinguished group in the Japanese Defense Forces. He was given very tough training, MI6 in Britain. And he was airdropped onto Lubang Island in Philippines. And he was instructed, he was given training. Think of this as artificial intelligence. He was given training. Get up in the morning, look around you, left, right, front, back. Take out of your haversack instruments. Take berries and nuts that you get in the forest because there's no other food. And if you see a white man, shoot him. That's a job description, what HR people will call job description. They dropped him there in 1942, and he kept doing this till 1972. The war got over in 1945. Long after the war was over, he was living in the forest, looking left, right, up, down, pulling out instruments, eating berries and nuts. In 1972, his former major came and said, "Oh, Hiru-san, where are you? The war is over. Why are you still doing all this?" He said, "Nobody told me that the war is over. I am following the instructions and the training given to me when I joined as a management trainee." And that is what is happening in companies. There's a bit of Hiro Onoda in each one of us. This is something you can laugh about, you can tell a story, but look inwards. There's a bit of Hiro Onoda in all of us. And I think once you're conscious of that, you learn to be adaptive and learning all the time. And AI is a fantastic technology. And I think people should adapt to it. But if you get into voodoo about it, then you may lose the wood for the trees. Second and the last story is about Choluteca Bridge. In a place called Honduras, you'll never go there until Trump decides to invade them or do something. Honduras is a little strip lying between North America and South America. And there was a river there. It's called the river Choluteca. And it was a very temperamental river. It created turbulence because it changed, hurricanes came, and people had difficulty crossing. So the government, newly elected in 1999 or something, decided to build a bridge. They said, "We'll do the best that technology can offer." Called the Japanese. They said, "Make such a bridge that it won't fall for 100 years." They said, "Oh, we have all that technology." They built it. 1 year later, a hurricane came. The bridge was intact, but the river changed its course. And to this day, if you go to Choluteca in the Honduras, you'll find it's the world's only bridge which is bridging nothing. Not because the bridge collapsed, but because the river changed its course. And I'm mentioning these two stories to say that you can respond to AI in a mechanical way. Listen to consultants. No problem with your consultancy. All consultants other than him. But never give up your never give up your natural intelligence, because the way of the human mind is something that we may forget for a moment when you come up with a challenging discussion on what are you doing about this or that. I'll stop there and maybe have conversation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot. That was fantastic. It's I always feel privileged to have so much knowledge. It's very challenging to get as much out of them as possible. So I'm going to jump in, although I have a few questions which I can ask them later. I'm going to ask the questions that have been put up to us from the audience. Boards play a critical role in resilience. How must board governance evolve in an era of AI risk, data vulnerabilities, and geopolitical uncertainties? Thiru has asked the question. It's addressed to you, but open towards...
I think it's a very valid question, and I think boards play a huge role. But boards should be aware that they have to play this huge role. Boards are not industry specialists. They may be an industry specialist. They are not accountants. They may be an accountant by training. They are not lawyers. They may be a lawyer by training. Boards are there to bring in NI. The CEO is there to bring in AI. I remember I've served on 25 boards over the last 37 years. So I speak with the experience of having worked as CEO, as non-executive, independent, dependent, all the combinations you can think of. And believe me, when you're the CEO, you are a very driven person. It doesn't matter whether it's a startup or it's Tata Steel. You're a very, very driven person. And sometimes you can miss the wood for the trees. The board's ability to stand back and ask the questions is very important. If the board fails to do that, but checks every number in the audit statement, account statement, then they have failed. So my answer to that is very, very important.
Thank you. And maybe I will put this to Ashwin. The question is, if India is to be a stabilizing force globally by 2035, what leadership values must be non-negotiable regardless of circumstances?
Yeah, so see, there's something interesting, I mean, about leadership. Earlier, also in the earlier session, Jerry talked at length quite well about the leadership part. You see, there is something which is now becoming very critical from the leadership point of view. I think mobilizing your people, mobilizing the team working with you, putting them at a point where they are at a huge advantage in terms of their skills, or help them in reskilling themselves, basically. The Sri Lankan example that I gave is certainly one of those examples. I've started realizing people can change. It's not difficult for people to change. In a correct environment, with correct incentive, people can change. That's all leadership all about, basically. To accept the fact that I have a team and I can make them do wonders, through my ability is my responsibility as a leader, basically. And that's something that becomes very critical. I thought that was but going back to the boards, I'll have just one or two submissions to make. I sit on several boards, I sit on several large boards as well. You see, as a board member, I have started realizing one thing. There are different subjects. I mean, accountants come from the accounting point of view, lawyers come from the law point of view. I think there is a common aspect which binds all the board members, and that is the strategy for the business. That is, what kind of business are you in? How long will you really continue with that, or how will you are likely to change? What are the various disruptions that may come up, and how do you prepare for them? I mean, as a board member, I could just be, every quarter the board meetings happen. I can just be a post-mortem guy and look at the analysis and say, oh, so good or so bad. It doesn't work like that any longer. As a board member, I think you have to really make sure that the change happens, the change that you want your company and your senior management group to happen. As a board member, you must push that. So that's the kind of, in a very tacit, in a very proper, organized manner, you got to do that.
Super. Thank you very much. The last question, because of time, and I know there are a lot more questions, and hopefully they'll be around for you to chat with them post this session. This is to Vijay Bhaskar, and technological disruptions often creates uneven outcomes. How can institutions balance efficiency with inclusion while maintaining trust? This is from Ishwar.
So, when we look at this, when we talk about technological disruptions, we get a sense that in some sense technologies are independent of us. Like it has an autonomy of its own, autonomic will of its own, and then we are in some sense responding to it by creating adaptive institutions and so on. While this is partly true, I would also like to kind of highlight the fact that historically technologies have always been socially driven, right? It was institutions which in some sense delivered technology, and once you recognize that, one, and then two, also recognize the fact that technologies, like a simple example is what happened, the way agricultural technology evolved in Japan and the US, right? It just responded to the differential factors of production. In Japan, it was, it took into account the fact that land was a scarce commodity, whereas labor was available in plenty. In the US, it's exactly the opposite, right? And you have two different trajectories of technologies happening within agriculture, and both of them delivering efficiency. So once we realize that, then we need to kind of ask, okay, given our resource endowments, what kind of technologies are likely to kind of work for us, one, and then second, once you already have a technology out there, what is it that one can do to make sure the disruptions are as minimal? I think these are the two things that we need to think going forward. And at the other end, the supply end, obviously making sure that it is kind of inclusive, make sure that opportunities are opened up across the board. Yeah.
Sure, please.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know you're running short of time, but I want to add one small line. I think the best way for leadership to deal with the inevitable inequality that comes out of these things is for the top leaders to be in touch with the most helpless people in society. It doesn't cost money. but it creates the empathy and the warmth that organizations require. And I draw upon the experience I've had. In 1989, there was a fire in Tata Steel in Jamshedpur, and a lot of people died. And JRD Tata acted in certain ways. Then the terror attack happened in 2007, and I saw firsthand Ratan Tata behaving in certain ways. And I'm using JRD and Ratan Tata only as a monikers. I mean, I can tell many other people, but time is short. And recently, one flight in Ahmedabad went under, and I saw I say young, but Chandra behaving in certain ways. There's a remarkable organizational similarity, which showed a sort of a genetic disposition. And that genetic disposition is, when in trouble or even before the trouble, let the topmost people interact with the weakest people, and you'll have a different society. So I just thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gopi. I think you moderated the session so well. May I now request the dignitaries to be honored, Mr. Mahalingam, Mr. Alex. May I also request Mr. Sanjay Shekhar to join us on the stage. The committee members, please come in, ma'am. And Dr. Chukalingam. Let's give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. The four gentlemen on the stage have actually, the fabulous session we had immediately after lunch. I think none of them even thought of going to sleep after a good lunch. So they kept the session so live and straight from the heart. Mr. RG, thank you so much. So as we move on to the next session, ladies and gentlemen, once again, a very, very interesting session that we have. This is a special session 3 on the theme R&D and innovation. I think all of us will agree in this hall. Morning also we have spoken about it, how R&D and innovation are important.
Sexy. Right? But the physicality of the business, as you called out, the metaphysicality of,
I think great leadership is
Now for a break.
Come, Gopi. A road moment for you to take something. Everyone.
Yeah, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. What a session we had. Mr. RG, Mr. Ashwin Parekh, Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, and Gopinath. So nice. So moving on to the next session on R&D and innovation.